Welcome back. Today we're doing a video on routers, and specifically the Linksys WRT54G. This is the version 2.2. This particular router has been in service for quite a while. Actually, it was my parents' old router, believe it or not. This particular router is going to get a custom firmware loaded on it called DD-WRT. And what firmware is it's bits of code that runs within the software. So you have hardware, you have software, and then you have firmware. Hardware is the actual piece, like your memory of your computer or your processor, your hard drive, and the collection of those pieces makes your computer, and the computer runs software, and that would be your Windows environment and whatever other programs that would run within Windows, for example. And firmware is the code, like I said, that runs within the hardware. So for example, your CD-ROM, there's a chip that makes the whole CD-ROM thing work, and that chip has firmware in it, and that firmware dictates what the drive can do, what capabilities it has, what speed the spindle spins at, the whole 9 yards. And there's also things like the capabilities of the burner. And every once in a while, new technology comes out in CD media, and they have to do a firmware upgrade, or else your drive won't read. You know, that's a firmware instance. Routers would have firmware on it. A router takes your internet signal that comes in from your house off of your modem, and the modem has its own function. But that line would come in through a LAN cable into the router, and then that router can send the internet to the other computers, and that's a real basic explanation. There's a whole thing with bits of data going back and forth, and you want to make sure the bit goes to the right computer for efficiency. Obviously, you can hook multiple computers to it, as you can see by the ports in the back here. This is your port where the internet comes in, the WAN port, the wide area network, and then the other one's the LAN, local area network. And then your antennas for your Wi-Fi or WLAN, wireless local area network. So obviously you can hook up 4 computers. Well, the reason how you can do that is something called a switch, and a switch takes those bits of data and sends them to the different computers, and it knows which computer it's going to, as opposed to a hub, which I'll grab here real quick. A hub splits information up between all the computers. However, it's not smart. There's no firmware on here. There's nothing, there's just duplicators. So when one computer requests information, when it gets sent back from whatever other computer that's connected to this, it goes to all the computers connected on this. So it's very inefficient. That's why there's a network utilization, like bar graph on here. And this thing will go back and forth for sure, depending on how many computers are hooked up to this thing. And it doesn't really matter, because if there's one computer and then you have a second, obviously, because you have to have at least another computer to network to, all these ports are getting activated. And that's why you have a switch, you know, and again, this switch is built within a router. The router is just the portion that does that to the internet. You can buy a switch, which I have installed here in my lab, and that switch just takes the computers and whatever other devices hooked to it, and it does its own, you know, routing. It's a smart device between the other systems. The router actually does that with internet signals, and there's other things too. But the main focus of this actual thing, not to get off topic, is the actual firmware that runs in this. And the stock firmware, which I will show you on a computer here in a moment, it's just specific to what features they want you to have available with this particular device. Whether or not the device has other capabilities or not is irrelevant. It's just what this particular model was meant for. And other firmware downloads, which are open source and can be adjusted to the individual router's needs, can give you a lot of other functions. And that's why you would want to load something like that. And I've had a lot of experience with the DD-WRT platform. Something I just heard about one day, and I thought it'd be kind of cool. I already had another Linksys router like this, and I already did the upgrade to it. I've upgraded that router to a Netgear model. I will put the link in the description below to the stats on that. I don't really have it in front of me, but that one was nice because it had a USB port, and the USB port allowed me to hook up a media stick and use it as a like network attached storage. But now that I have the DD-WRT firmware loaded on it, that USB port also serves as a print server, so I have additional functionality. Also, you can adjust the output of the antennas and pick different bands. I know there's some controversy about that. I think it's the FCC that was recently saying that they don't want you to do that because you mess with bands that other things are run on. I'm not sure about the whole legality of it, so I guess you should check your local laws. That's probably the smart thing to do. But with that, we'll get loaded in and I'll show you all those different features. There's some that are far beyond what anybody would ever need. Like you can do hotspots with this, so if you want to give somebody your username and password, they can access your internet through a hotspot and Wi-Fi, which is kind of cool. I think there's even one where you can earn money somehow doing it. We can actually take a look inside this one because this is actually a pretty neat model. At the back over here, there's a little security seal that once you break it, you can just take the two ends and just pop them straight off, and you have access to the front. This particular one, the version 2.2, I particularly like because the antennas are removable and they have a pretty standard jack in the back here. So if you wanted to hook up an external antenna that was larger than this, or maybe a rooftop model. In fact, I'm actually thinking about purchasing some kind of a small mast, since there was actually an antenna on this particular building I'm in at one point. So the hardware is already on the roof, the tie downs, all that stuff's ready to go. I just need the wire and the mast and pretty much everything else to, from that point up, you know, and the wire and obviously all that stuff. But the Wi-Fi antennas are actually not that expensive, and believe it or not, I can actually get an antenna that's powerful enough to transmit Wi-Fi throughout the entire park I live in. So I can actually take my tablet and go walking at night and listen to Pandora off Wi-Fi if I wanted, hypothetically, and it would work anywhere in here just using the output of one of these leads here up to a rooftop antenna, or maybe even a parabolic or something like that. But yeah, here's the inside of it if you wanted to see what that looks like. Of course, one of the antenna jacks is actually connected directly to the board. I mean, they both are, but the other one has a lead going to it. So if you wanted to put a different kind of antenna connector, this would be the one you'd want to disconnect and solder a different lead onto. And that's very possible. Also, for the hackers out there that like to change LEDs, you probably could do that. These are just right-facing LEDs in their own housing, but other than that, they look like they're just standard 3mm leads. So you could probably desolder those and change the color if you wanted. But yeah, it's definitely moddable. So I'm going to go ahead, put this back together, and we're going to go through the steps of loading DD-WRT. Now, I did say that that was a custom firmware, and I have some notes in this. This is the like I said, WRT54G version 2.2. It's running the BCM 4712 chipset. It's got 16 megabytes of RAM and a 4 megabyte flash. Now, with DDRT and any of these custom firmwares, that RAM and flash makes a difference because obviously that's the working memory you have on this particular device. The higher the RAM, the bigger the operating system you can put on this and the more features you have. This particular device, we have the mini file. And I highly recommend when you go to do this, you go onto the DD-WRT website, and the first thing you'll get, if you do it right, is the router database, where you can just put in your model number, and it will tell you if it's available or not for it. Because each time they do it, it's a separate build, and that's the thing about it that's kind of cool. And if you're a developer, you could probably also help them build their own. Let me do a jump cut here so I can focus on putting this together, or maybe I can do it. One moment. All right, we're all back together. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the power supply for this particular model, but I do have a cord that fits, and I do have an adjustable power supply. This was actually set to 12 volts. The 12 volt rail in this particular power supply isn't exactly putting out 12. As you can see, it's 11.6. That's fine. And I have this set to limit the current at 600 milliamps, which this is only going to draw 200, maybe 300. I'm going to go ahead and plug this in, and I already have the polarity set right, and we can see it's got lights on it and they're going to light up and do its thing. What I do have here is I have a Windows XP laptop. You don't need Windows XP, you just need your internet browser. You can do this from any operating system. You got to go onto the WRT54G website. I'll put the link in the description below. You have to download the bin file for your particular router. When you put the router number into the search database, it'll come up with your model if it's available or not. And there's usually a Wiki link and the link for the file and everything right there that you need. And then you can just go ahead, download the file, and once you get that file, this is the steps that you're going to want. Now before you do anything, I want to show you what the original system looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and plug a LAN cable in, and that LAN cable is hooked up directly to the port on the laptop here. And I'm just using this laptop because I didn't want to have to go ahead and fuss with all the stuff on my particular computer or the server in here, which is the only other machines I have. But I'm just going to go ahead and zoom in here, and I'm going to open up the browser. The particular one I'm using is Chrome because that's just the one I like to use. I actually have another monitor set up over here, so I had to move the browser off that monitor if you don't mind me. Here it is. The default IP address, I should say, for the router is 192.168.1.1. When you hit enter, you'll come up with a thing that asks for a password. Again, if you have the default, which this was never really set to anything, the password is just admin with no username. And when you hit login, you should come right in. Now this is the WRT54G. I'm sorry, this is the stock firmware that's running on the router right now. And the reason it's kind of confusing because the WRT54G versus the DD-WRT, it's kind of a tongue twister. It's a wireless router, I'm assuming, is what they kind of abbreviate to, and 54G is because it's the G band. But you can go in here, and obviously it's going to set up the local IP, which is the address we typed in, the 192.168.1.1, and the subnet mask is the default 255.255.255.0. You can also set your time zone. You can do basic things, whether you want it to be a DHCP server, or if you want to disable that and not have it automatically assign IPs. There's a lot of networking things in here that most people won't mess with. But there are some things. You can set up the wireless in here, obviously, what the name of the wireless system is going to be called, whether it broadcasts or not. This is where you're going to set up, what you want to name it. There's, the security. This is where you'll set up, like, this is my old parents' one, so you can see it still has the key in here. We have to do a hard reset on this before we load any firmware. And that'll clear out all these settings and everything. But this is, everything that you need is here, but like I said, there may be other things that you want access to that you don't have access to, or I know a lot of people say if you're setting up like Minecraft servers, or I have a Windows Home server here, I had to mess with things in my router here with the port forwarding and all that. You may have more options. A lot of them are still pretty basic, or like quality of service. You could set all these different things to, provide better speed per se to one computer over another in your network, like a higher priority. If you're using one as a gaming computer, you want to set it to a higher priority, you would do this in quality of service. There's all these different parts, and a lot of them, like I said, are beyond the scope of this video or beyond the scope of most people's knowledge, and some of them are even beyond my scope of knowledge because they're just things I don't use on an everyday basis. But you do have those settings here to change, and just loading WRT, the DD-WRT program gives you, like I said, more options to go through, more settings to change most of the time. A lot of people say it's harder to hack into, so if you actually set up the security right, it's a harder system to break into. It's Linux based, so that's kind of cool too. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and load that. To do so, you have to download the file like I mentioned. I have that done on another computer. We're going to plug in a flash drive into this computer and do that. But it's there's a spot in here where you can go ahead and actually load the firmware, and that's what we're going to go find. So I'm going to go do that, and we'll be right back. And once we get that found, I'm going to show you how to do the hard reset. All right, now according to the DD-WRT Wiki, the proper way to do a hard reset on this particular router is what's called a 30-30-30. What that means is we're going to hold the reset button, which is this little guy back here. Let me disconnect the LAN cable. We don't need that. But I will keep the power cable hooked up. That's important. The reset button's right here. You need something like a pen or a thin screwdriver, something that's going to be able to push that button. And you'll know obviously when you have a contact because you'll hear it click. But we're going to hold that down for 30 seconds while we're holding it. So push it down, count to 30. Unplug the power cord. Then you're going to count 30 more seconds while still holding it in. And then you're going to plug the power cord in again while still holding the button down, and then count another 30 seconds. So in total, you're going to hold the button in for 3 30-second bouts all at once. And once you're done with that, we can go ahead and start loading this on here. And we do have to do a couple things on the computer first before we do that. But I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to do the hard reset, and I'll come back once that's done. All right, now that I did the hard reset, I just have the router running in the distance over here. And we're going to do a couple things on the computer that the DD-WRT people recommend in their wiki for, again, this particular build. It may be different on other builds, I'm not 100% sure, but it's so far the ones I've done have followed a very similar routine. And this is the reason, again, why I'm using a separate computer for this, just so I don't have to mess with the network settings and everything in my particular computer. But it's not a big deal. You can always set them back. First thing we're going to do here is we're going to change the static IP address, or at least assign one, to this particular computer. Now you have to go into your network settings. A lot of times there's the icon down here in the taskbar. If you're using, again, Windows XP or even 7, 8, I'm sure 10, they all have that. They should also have the network connection down here. If not, you can go into the control panel, and we can do it that way. If you go in here, there should be the network connections, and we go into the local area connection and right click it and go into properties, and we want to go to the Internet Protocol TCP/IP piece here, and then hit properties, and then we can hit use the following IP address, and we're going to set this to 192.168.1.7. Oops. And then you're going to leave the subnet mask as the 255.255.255.0, and the default gateway would be what the router is usually set to, which is 192.168.1 and then 1. And actually you have to hit the right arrow key to get over to this one, or just move it with your mouse. And then the preferred DNS, we're going to do the same thing, 192.168.1.1, and then OK. And then hit close. And that's going to go ahead and change the IP of the computer. And then the other thing we're going to do, once we close out of here, is I'm actually going to go back to the control panel, go to the security center, and then we're going to disable the firewall by clicking on firewall here, and then clicking on off, which of course they don't recommend. And I also point out on the bottom over here, if you can't make it out or not, I have Bluetooth disabled and I have the wireless disabled. And the internet looks like it's disconnected because it is. I just have the wire off right over here. And what I'm going to do now is plug this into the router using the first port. So we have a direct connection from the router directly to the computer, nothing else hooked up to it, and it already is powered up. I should be able to now go back to the computer here and open up my Chrome browser and go to that address of 192.168.1.1. When it comes up with the username password, again, we're going to go ahead and type in admin for the password, hit login, we're going to want to go to the administration tab here at the top, and then you're going to go to the firmware upgrade button right here, which is another tab, and it's going to ask you to select a file. Now this is what you would use obviously if you're upgrading the Linksys file system to a new one, but this bin file system that they use here is kind of universal, and we're going to exploit that. So when we hit choose file, I actually have this saved already on my desktop, and again I got this right from the DD-WRT website, and this is actually put a shortcut. I have it on a drive here. So this is the, again, DD-WRT version 24, and it's the mini build for the WRT54G. Once you get that up here, and it will choose it, you hit upgrade, and this is going to do its thing. Now what it does is it kind of shuts down this operating system that's running right now. The router goes into a state where one of the ROMs will load that file after it's downloaded to memory, and it'll start, you know, flashing itself and then reloading that on here. So it thinks it's loading, you know, another Linksys system or whatever, you know, firmware. That's kind of irrelevant because it's just a chip. After all, hardware is hardware. But once this is done, we're going to let this wait a full 5 minutes, for, you know, at least, because we want to let this thing build in the back. It's going to do its thing. You won't have much access. Once that's done, we should be able to load up our browser here and navigate to the 192.168.1.1 address again, and then that way we'll get right in. If we get to that stage, that'll be great. If not, then we have other things we have to do with this device. It should be this easy. If it's not, then, you know, some issue happened. Like this says upgrade successful, so that means it took the file and it should go ahead and start doing its thing. We are going to let it wait the full 5 minutes here. So I will shut the browser down, and I'll shut these other windows down, and I'm just going to hang out here. Now the whole thing about Windows XP, if you didn't know already, obviously it's beyond its lifetime. So you're not going to get any Windows updates, so there are some security issues with this, but this particular unit isn't connected to the internet. I don't have any internet ran to the router, I don't have wireless connected, anything like that, so I'm disconnected completely from the net. It's not an issue right now, and the file that I brought over came from a computer that is connected to the net and has been checked with virus scanners and all that great stuff, so there's no real worry. Would I keep Windows XP on here? Probably not. This should get Windows 7 at least put on it, but that's a subject for another time. With that, let me cut the footage here, and we'll come back once I have that 5 minutes passed, and we'll see if we can log into that router. And now it's time for the moment of truth. So once again, I'm going to open up my browser, and I'm going to go to that website 192.168.1.1, which is already up here. And bam, just like that, we're already into the DD-WRT. Now this is the what I'll call the landing page, and this just shows you your brief stats. It's going to show you the name of the router, which again, WRT54G. It's going to tell you if the DCHP is enabled and how much memory is available, and the whole nine here. Also the wireless, how many packets are received and sent, whether or not the radio was on, if there's any DHCP clients, so if there's anybody hooked in right now, it would tell you what their host name is, the IP address. You get all information here, and the same thing with wireless. Obviously nothing's connected to this router right now, so we shouldn't see anything here, but that's where it would be, obviously. Once you click on any of the options at the top here, like setup or wireless services, security, you know, any of these things, it's going to come up with the username and password. The default username is root, R-O-O-T, and the default password's admin, A-D-M-I-N. Enter brings you right in, and this is where you can set all the settings, everything, obviously. And I'm going to do another video on the actual how to set stuff up in here. A lot of this is very similar to what was already here. You can probably see the main WAN and network setup here is very similar to what we had in the prior operating system. But you can go in here and just, you know, kind of mess around with this once you get it open. It tells you on the side over here what these things do, which is kind of cool. and there's a lot of information on the wiki for the DD-WRT. I like at the top it tells you your uptime, and it also gives you the IP address of the WAN, which is the wide area network. That's your external IP. That's what people would want to connect to your house. That's the IP they would need. Right now it's all zeros because I'm not connected externally, but it's nice to have that right there at the top. And yeah, there's definitely, like, again, there's probably things that are way beyond what most people need, but if you have a small network or a business or anything like that, and you're running professional stuff, and you get one of the basic household Linksys systems like this, which, hey, works in its own merit, but when you have those extra settings that you can't set because it's just a basic model, and then you get this in your hands, you're like, oh, this is pretty good. What's cool is you can set up virtual interfaces on the SSID here, so you can put, you know, your main one, and you can have secondaries, and you can do all kinds of stuff like that. And the wireless security is pretty nice on this. It's a nice system. I like it. But anyway, that's really all I have for this particular video. Like I said, I'm going to do a separate video on some of the things in here and what they do and why you need them, like the various hotspots, and you get the idea. There's definitely a lot in here, and it's a pretty cool program. I definitely recommend it. But as you can see, it's that easy. I mean, it's nothing really to it. Just you got to make sure you follow the steps right. Now, I do also have a Cisco router. Now, Cisco actually bought Linksys a while back, and it's very similar. So we're going to do a video of loading DD-WRT on this. Spoiler alert, I already looked it up. It does work. So we'll check that out. It should be the same procedure. And then we're going to show, again, practical usage for these things. One of them being you can use it as a range extender. There may be another file. The point of loading this particular build, by the way, is you can always go into administration and go to firmware upgrade and actually load another firmware onto here. And you want to do this particular build before you do another version of the DD-WRT. And I mentioned hotspots. You could turn this into a hotspot if you want. You can also turn this into, like I said, a range extender. And I believe another thing you can do, which is something I may look into, is you could actually take this router, put it in another location, and the Wi-Fi that's broadcasting here within my office, if this could pick it up, it can turn this into a I call it an opposite wireless router. So I'd be able to hook, let's say, this in my shed with a computer, and this would receive the Wi-Fi from my house and translate it back to a local area network, and then my computer would be able to connect remotely. So I can have, like, again, a computer out there connected to my home server in here wirelessly, which is really, really cool. And again, the other thing I could do is I could use this as a secondary router and use it as like a neighborhood broadcast system if I want, and even use it as a hotspot and even possibly charge, which is kind of cool. But anyway, I will put a link in the description below to the proper places to go, and if I have the other videos up, they'll also be there. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. That's how you can find the other videos. And thanks for watching.